The engine, the silence, and the man of shadow shave. You ever felt that moment when the world stops moving, but your heart starts racing? That precise instant when you realize you're completely alone, miles from civilization, with nothing but endless sand stretching toward a horizon that seems to mock your existence. Lara Chen had experienced many uncomfortable moments in her 32 years as an archaeologist, but nothing had prepared her for the absolute silence that followed. The death of her Jeep's engine in the middle of the Arabian desert. The metallic click of the key turning in the ignition echoed like a death sentence. Once, twice, 3 times, nothing. The dashboard lights flickered weakly before surrendering to the merciless heat that had been building since dawn. Outside, the sun hung like a malevolent eye, watching her predicament with the indifference of something that had witnessed countless human struggles across millennia. Lara pressed her forehead against the steering wheel, feeling the hot plastic burn her skin. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of this was supposed to happen. The expedition had been her escape, her chance to disappear into work and forget the mess she'd left behind in Cairo. The broken engagement, the published paper that had been stolen by her former colleague, the department politics that had made her life a living hell. She had come to the desert seeking silence, seeking solitude, seeking anything that would drown out the noise in her head. But now, staring at the endless expanse of golden sand that surrounded her disabled vehicle, she realized that silence could be more terrifying than any chaos she'd ever known. The GPS showed nothing but static. Her satellite phone had lost signal 2 hours ago. The nearest settlement was 47 miles away, according to her last reading, and she had exactly 3 bottles of water left in her supplies. She stepped out of the Jeep, immediately hit by a wall of heat that made her stumble backward. The sand beneath her boots was so hot she could feel it through the thick soles. Her wide-brimmed hat provided minimal protection against the sun that seemed determined to cook her alive. She popped the hood, though she knew it was futile. The engine was beyond her mechanical knowledge, and even if she could fix it, she lacked the tools and parts necessary for any meaningful repair. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the occasional settling sound of metal expanding in the heat. Lara had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on handling crises with calm rationality. But standing there, dwarfed by the immensity of the desert, she felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel, genuine fear. She was reaching for her water bottle when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a mirage. The heat creates illusions, she told herself. Her mind was playing tricks on her, conjuring up salvation where none existed. But as her eyes adjusted to the glare, she realized the figure walking toward her was real. Painfully, impossibly real. He emerged from the shimmering heat like something from another time. Tall and lean, wrapped in traditional desert robes that seemed to flow with each measured step. His face was partially concealed by the fabric, but she could see dark eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. He moved with the confident grace of someone who belonged in this hostile environment, someone for whom the desert held no terror. Lara's first instinct was relief. Her second was suspicion. In her years of fieldwork, she had learned that help in remote places often came with a price, especially for a woman alone. He stopped about 20 feet away, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When he spoke, his voice was deep and measured, carrying easily across the space between them despite the soft volume. "You seem to be having difficulties." His English was flawless, tinged with an accent she couldn't quite place. British education, perhaps, but with something else underneath. Something that spoke of ancient traditions and distant kingdoms. "My Jeep broke down," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the hammer of her heartbeat. "I don't suppose you have a satellite phone I could borrow?" He tilted his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of a smile beneath the fabric covering his face. "I'm afraid not, but I might be able to help with your mechanical problems. And why would you do that? Because leaving you here to die would be rather inconvenient for both of us." His matter-of-fact tone sent a chill down her spine despite the blazing heat. There was something about the way he said it, as if he knew things about her situation that she didn't. As if this meeting wasn't the random coincidence it appeared to be. "Who are you?" she asked, taking a step closer to the Jeep. Her hand found the door handle, ready to slam it shut and lock herself inside if necessary. Someone who knows these sands better than most. Someone who can help you get back to civilization. "If you'll let me." The offer hung in the air between them like smoke. Lara studied his face, or what she could see of it, searching for any sign of deception. His eyes were dark and serious, but she detected something else there, a weariness that spoke of burdens carried too long, of secrets that weighed more than gold. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Names are dangerous things in the desert. They have power. They can be used against you." "That's very philosophical, but I'm not going anywhere with someone who won't even tell me what to call him." He was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing the risks of revelation. Finally, he said, "You may call me Khalil. And you are Dr. Lara Chen, archaeologist from the University of Cairo, currently on leave due to what your colleagues generously term personal difficulties." The blood drained from her face. "How do you know that?" "I know many things. The question is whether you want to survive long enough to learn why." Before she could respond, he moved to the Jeep and lifted the hood with practiced ease. His hands, she noticed, were not the hands of a simple desert dweller. They were clean, well-maintained, with the kind of careful grooming that spoke of wealth and education. He examined the engine with the confidence of someone who understood machinery, poking and prodding with the systematic approach of an engineer. "Your radiator has cracked," he said without looking up. "The heat sensor failed, probably hours ago. You've been running on borrowed time since dawn. Can you fix it?" "Not here, not with what we have available. But I know a place where we can get the parts you need. It's about a day's journey on foot." "On foot." The words came out as a croak. "In this heat, we'll travel at night. Rest during the day. It's the only way to survive out here." Lara stared at him, her mind racing through the alternatives. She could wait for rescue, but who would come looking for her? She told no one. Her exact route had specifically chosen this remote path to avoid human contact. She could try to walk back to the main road, but 47 miles in the desert heat was a death sentence. Or she could trust this mysterious stranger who seemed to know far too much about her personal life. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. "Because you have no choice. Because the desert doesn't care about your suspicions or your independence. Because in about 3 hours, when the sun reaches its peak, the temperature will climb to over 50 degrees Celsius, and your water will be gone by tomorrow morning." His words hit her like physical blows. Each one was true, and each one narrowed her options until there was really only one path forward. "If I go with you," she said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that you won't just leave me somewhere? Or worse, you have my word. The word of a man who won't even tell me his real name." Something flickered in his eyes then, something that might have been pain or regret. "My word is all I have left to give, Dr. Chen. In my culture, it's worth more than gold, more than life itself." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever game he was playing, whatever secrets he was hiding, she believed he meant what he said about helping her. And really, what choice did she have? The desert was going to kill her whether she trusted him or not. At least with him, she had a chance. "All right," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "But I want to know what we're walking into. Where exactly are we going?" "To a place that doesn't exist on any map. To people who will help us because they owe me a debt. And perhaps, if you're very lucky, to answers about why you're really here." "What do you mean? Why I'm really here?" "I'm here because my Jeep broke down." "Are you? Or are you here because you're running from something, because you needed to disappear so badly that you came to the one place on Earth where disappearing is easy?" The question hit too close to home. Lara felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're brilliant. I know you're stubborn. I know you're haunted by something that happened in Cairo, something that made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. And I know that right now, whether you admit it or not, you're terrified. Of course I'm terrified. I'm stranded in the middle of a desert with a complete stranger who seems to know my life story. Good. Fear will keep you alive out here. Overconfidence kills. He moved to the back of the Jeep and began sorting through her supplies with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Water, first aid kit, emergency food, navigation equipment. He packed only the essentials into a canvas bag, leaving behind anything that wasn't crucial for survival. We'll leave at sunset, he said. Try to rest until then, and Dr. Chen. Whatever you're running from, whatever brought you out here, you need to put it aside. The desert has its own rules, its own justice. Out here, the only thing that matters is staying alive. As he spoke, Lara found herself studying his movements, the way he held himself, the casual authority with which he made decisions. This wasn't a man who asked for permission or waited for approval. This was someone accustomed to being obeyed, someone who expected his word to be law. Who are you really? She asked again. Someone who understands what it means to be lost. He replied. Someone who knows that sometimes the only way to find yourself is to disappear completely. The cryptic answer frustrated her, but she sensed that pushing would only make him retreat further into mystery. Instead, she climbed back into the Jeep and tried to make herself comfortable in the shade. The heat was already becoming unbearable, and she could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning's dying efforts. As the sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace, Lara found herself thinking about the choices that had led her here, the bitter breakup with Marcus, whose betrayal had cut deeper than any physical wound, the stolen research that had taken 3 years of her life and handed it to someone else, the department politics that had made her question whether she even wanted to continue in academia. She had come to the desert seeking silence, seeking space to think. Instead, she had found a mysterious stranger who seemed to see right through her carefully constructed defenses, a man who moved through the hostile landscape like he owned it, who spoke in riddles and offered salvation with one hand while hiding secrets with the other. What have I gotten myself into? She wondered, watching Callel as he settled into the shade beside the Jeep. His eyes were closed, but she could tell he wasn't sleeping. He was listening, waiting, alert to dangers she couldn't even imagine. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and terrible in its vastness. Somewhere out there, beyond the shimmering horizon, lay the answers she'd been seeking. But first, she would have to survive the questions that were already forming in her mind. Questions about the man beside her. Questions about why he had appeared exactly when she needed him most. Questions about the secrets he carried and the debt he'd mentioned. Questions about what it meant to disappear completely and whether that was really what she wanted. The sun reached its zenith, and the desert fell into the deep, hypnotic silence that comes with absolute heat. But beneath that silence, Lara could hear something else. The whisper of sand shifting in the wind, the distant call of something wild and ancient. The sound of her own heartbeat, steady and strong, reminding her that she was still alive, still fighting, still hoping for something better than the mess she'd left behind. As the hours passed and the heat became a living thing that pressed against her skin, Lara found herself thinking about trust, about the leap of faith required to follow a stranger into the unknown, about the possibility that sometimes salvation comes in the form of someone who refuses to reveal their true name. The desert had rules, Callel had said, its own justice. Perhaps that was what she needed, not the complicated politics of the academic world, not the social expectations and broken promises of civilization, but something more fundamental, something that stripped away all the lies and pretense and left only the essential truth of survival. When the sun finally began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Callel stirred from his meditation. He looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes, and smiled. "Are you ready, Dr. Chen?" "Ready as I'll ever be." "Then let's go find out what you're really made of." The first fight, the last drop of water dessert at sunset, was a different world entirely. Gone was the brutal, hostile landscape of midday, replaced by something that seemed almost gentle in its beauty. The sand glowed like molten gold, and the air carried the promise of cooler temperatures ahead. But Lara knew better than to trust appearances. The dessert was still deadly, still unforgiving. It had simply changed its mask. Callow moved with the fluid grace of someone born to this environment. His robes flowed around him like water, and his feet seemed to find purchase on the shifting sand without effort. Lara, despite her years of fieldwork, felt clumsy and awkward in comparison. Her boots kept sliding, her backpack felt heavier with each step, and the water bottle at her hip seemed to mock her with its weight. They had been walking for less than an hour when she finally snapped. "Stop," she said, dropping her pack and planting her feet firmly in the sand. "Just stop." Cal paused and turned back to her, his expression unreadable in the growing twilight. "Is there a problem, Dr. Chen?" "Yes, there's a problem, a big problem. You show up out of nowhere. You know things about my life that no stranger should know. You refuse to tell me your real name, and now you're leading me into the middle of nowhere based on some vague promise of help. I want answers, and I want them now. Answers are dangerous things in the desert. They can get you killed. So can ignorance. So can following mysterious strangers who speak in riddles and act like they own the entire Sahara." He studied her for a long moment, and she thought. She saw something like amusement flicker in his eyes. "You think I act like I own the desert? I think you act like you own everything. You move like someone who's never been told no, who's never had to ask permission for anything. You speak with the kind of authority that comes from being obeyed, without question, and you're leading me somewhere without even having the courtesy to tell me where we're going. Careful, Dr. Chen, you're making assumptions about things you don't understand. Then help me understand. Who are you? What do you want? And why do you care whether I live or die?" Kalil set down his own pack and moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine details of his face in the dying light. His skin was weathered by sun and wind, but his features were aristocratic, refined. This was not a man who had spent his life doing manual labor. This was someone who had been educated, privileged, protected. "You want to know who I am," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm someone who has lost everything. Someone who has been betrayed by people he trusted, abandoned by those he loved, cast out from the only life he ever knew. I'm someone who understands what it means to have your world collapse around you while everyone you thought cared about you stands by and watches." The raw pain in his voice caught her off guard. She had expected deflection, more riddles, perhaps, even anger. She hadn't expected this glimpse of genuine vulnerability. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to what?" "Ask difficult questions. Demand honesty. You have every right to be suspicious, Dr. Chen. In fact, I'd be concerned if you weren't. But you asked why I care whether you live or die, and the answer is simple. Because I see something of myself in you. Because I recognize the look of someone who's running from pain they can't escape. You don't know anything about my pain, don't I? You came to the desert alone, deliberately choosing the most remote route possible. You told no one your exact destination. You brought enough supplies for a week, but planned to be gone for 3. You're not just conducting research, Dr. Chen. You're hiding." His words hit her like physical blows. Each observation was accurate, each deduction painfully precise. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if he could see straight through all her carefully constructed defenses. "Maybe I am hiding," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Maybe I have good reason to hide. That doesn't give you the right to manipulate me. Manipulate you." He stepped back, genuine surprise flickering across his features. "Is that what you think I'm doing? I think you're playing some kind of game." I think you know more about why I'm here than you're letting on, and I think you showed up at exactly the right moment to play the hero, which is a hell of a coincidence. You believe I orchestrated your Jeep breaking down. I believe you're not the simple desert dweller you're pretending to be. I believe you have resources, connections, information that you're not sharing. And I believe you're using my desperate situation to your advantage. Kel was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face as if trying to solve a puzzle. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried an edge of steel. Dr. Chen, if I wanted to manipulate you, I would have done it hours ago. If I wanted to take advantage of your situation, I would have simply taken your supplies and left you to die. If I wanted to play games, I would have chosen someone who wasn't quite so suspicious and analytical. Then what do you want? I want to get you to safety. I want to honor the debt I mentioned. And perhaps, if we're both very lucky, I want to find something I lost a long time ago. What did you lose? My faith in humanity. My belief that people can be trusted. My hope that there's still some good left in this world. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. She had expected many things from this conversation, but not this raw admission of loss and longing. Not this glimpse of a man who seemed as broken as she felt. I don't understand, she said. What does any of that have to do with me? Because you're asking the right questions. Because you're refusing to be a victim. Because even though you're terrified and alone and completely dependent on a stranger, you're still fighting. Still demanding answers. Still refusing to simply accept what you're told. And that matters to you. It matters because it reminds me of who I used to be. Before I learned that asking questions gets you exiled. Before I discovered that demanding honesty gets you branded as a traitor. Before I found out that fighting for what's right can cost you everything you've ever loved, there was something in his voice that made her throat constrict. A pain so deep and raw that it made her own troubles seem insignificant by comparison. She wanted to ask what had happened to him, who had hurt him, what he had lost. But she could see from his expression that he had already revealed more than he'd intended. I'm sorry, she said again. Whatever happened to you, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just understand that I'm not your enemy. I'm not trying to manipulate you or use you or lead you into danger. I'm trying to help you because helping you helps me remember who I used to be. And because in a world that seems determined to break everything good and decent, occasionally, we need to prove that honor still exists. Honor, the obligation to help those who cannot help themselves. The duty to protect those who have been abandoned by others. The responsibility to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. She studied his face in the fading light, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was weariness, pain, and something that might have been hope. Whatever game he was playing, whatever secrets he was hiding, she believed he meant what he said about helping her. All right, she said finally. I'll try to trust you, but I want some answers in return. Real answers, not riddles and philosophy. What do you want to know? Start with the basics. Where are we going? Who are these people who owe you a debt? And what's this place that doesn't exist on any map? Kel retrieved his pack and checked the position of the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. We're going to an oasis about 15 miles from here. It's inhabited by a tribe of Bedouins who have been living in these sands for centuries. They're not particularly friendly to outsiders, but they'll help us because I once did them a significant favor. What kind of favor? I helped them recover something that was stolen from them. Something that was vital to their survival and their honor. And this place doesn't exist on any map because they prefer it that way. Because the modern world has not been kind to the traditional nomadic peoples. Because sometimes survival requires invisibility. It was a reasonable explanation, but Lara sensed there was more to it than he was telling her. There was something about the way he talked about these people. A deference that suggested they were more than just another Bedouin tribe. Something about his manner suggested he wasn't just a casual acquaintance who had once done them a favor. What aren't you telling me? She asked, "Many things, but not because I want to deceive you. Because some truths are dangerous, and because you're not ready to hear them yet. Try me, Dr. Chen." Less than 6 hours ago, you were a university professor whose biggest concern was academic politics. Now you're walking through the desert with a man you've never met, trusting him with your life, dependent on the hospitality of people you've never heard of. You're already dealing with more change than most people experience in a lifetime. Some revelations are best saved for later. I'm tougher than I look. I know you are. But tough doesn't mean reckless, and right now, the most important thing is getting you to safety. Everything else can wait. She wanted to argue, to push harder for answers, but something in his tone told her that pressing the issue would only make him retreat further into mystery. Instead, she shouldered her pack and gestured toward the darkening horizon. "Lead the way. Then, but don't expect me to stop asking questions just because you're not ready to answer them. I wouldn't dream of it. Your questions are one of the things I find most interesting about you." There was something in the way he said interesting that made her skin tingle. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but aware. Aware of the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way his eyes seemed to see more than they should. They walked in silence for the next hour, following what appeared to be a completely unmarked path through the shifting sands. But Callow never hesitated, never paused to check his direction. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going, who had traveled this route many times before. The temperature dropped steadily as full darkness fell, and Lara found herself grateful for the warmer clothes she had packed. The desert night was clear and cold, filled with more stars than she had ever seen. The silence was different from the oppressive quiet of the day, more peaceful, almost meditative. "It's beautiful," she said, looking up at the brilliant canopy of stars. Double quotes. "Yes," Callow agreed. "The desert shows you things you can't see anywhere else. It strips away the pollution and the noise and the distractions of civilization and lets you see the world as it really is. Is that why you're here, too? See the world as it really is." "I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. Because this is the only place left where I can be myself without pretense or explanation. Because the desert doesn't care about your past or your mistakes or your regrets. It only cares about who you are right now, in this moment, and who are you right now, in this moment. Someone who's trying to save a brilliant woman who's too stubborn for her own good. Someone who's hoping that maybe, just maybe, there's still some redemption left in this world." Redemption from what? From the choices I've made. From the people I've failed. From the man I used to be. She wanted to ask more, but something in his posture told her that the conversation was over. They walked on through the star-filled night, to broken people finding temporary solace in shared silence. It was near midnight when they stopped to rest and drink water. Callow produced a small camp stove and heated water for tea, adding herbs from a pouch he carried in his robes. The tea was bitter, but warming, and Lara found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. "How much further?" she asked. 4 hours, maybe 5. We'll reach the oasis just before dawn, and then we'll see if my friends are as welcoming as I hope they are. It's been a long time since I've visited them." "How long?" "Long enough for things to change. Long enough for old debts to be forgotten. Long enough for me to wonder if I'll be welcome at all." The uncertainty in his voice was troubling. If these people turned them away, if they were refused help, what would happen then? They had water for perhaps another day, maybe 2 if they were careful. After that, they would be entirely dependent on finding another source of help. "Are you worried?" she asked, "about being turned away?" "Yes, about finding another way to help you if that happens." "No, there are always alternatives, Dr. Chen, always other paths to explore, even in the middle of the desert, especially in the middle of the desert. This place has been home to nomadic peoples for thousands of years. There are wells and oases and hidden places that have sustained life since before the pyramids were built. The secret is knowing where to look, and you know where to look. I know some places, I know some people. I know some secrets that might prove useful. Again, the cryptic answers. Again, the sense that he was hiding something important. But Lara was beginning to understand that this was simply who he was. A man of secrets, a keeper of mysteries, someone who revealed truth in layers rather than all at once. As they prepared to continue their journey, she found herself thinking about trust again, about the gradual process of learning to rely on someone whose motives were unclear, about the strange intimacy that develops between people who share danger and uncertainty. Whatever Callum was hiding, whatever secrets he carried, she was beginning to believe that his intentions toward her were honest. He could have abandoned her hours ago, could have taken what he needed from her supplies and left her to die. Instead, he was leading her toward help, sharing his own resources, treating her with a respect that she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said as they resumed walking. "For what? For not leaving me to die. For sharing your water and your knowledge and your mysterious connections. For treating me like a person instead of a burden. Dr. Chen, you are many things, but a burden is not one of them. If anything, you've reminded me why I used to believe in the fundamental goodness of people. Used to, before I learned that goodness is a luxury that most people abandon when it becomes inconvenient. Before I discovered that honor and loyalty are considered quaint concepts in the modern world. Before I found out that the people you trust the most are often the ones who will betray you the fastest." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. Whatever had happened to him, whoever had hurt him, the wounds were still fresh despite the time that had passed. "Not everyone is like that," she said quietly. "Some people still believe in doing the right thing, even when it costs them. Are you one of those people, Dr. Chen?" "I try to be. I don't always succeed, but I try." "Then perhaps there's hope for both of us." They walked on through the night, following the ancient paths that connected oasis to oasis, well to well, life to life. The desert stretched endlessly around them, vast and mysterious and filled with secrets that had been kept for millennia. And somewhere ahead, beyond the horizon, lay the answers that would determine whether they lived or died, whether they found salvation or simply traded one form of danger for another. The stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time in their eternal dance, and step by step, mile by mile, Lara found herself walking deeper into a mystery that would change her life forever. Signals in the sky and lies in the sand. The desert night sky was an ocean of stars, so clear that Lara could barely look away. Each constellation seemed close enough to touch, as if the universe itself were trying to whisper forgotten secrets. But none of those whispers was more disturbing than Callum's silence over the past hours. They walked without urgency, guided by memory and the quiet certainty of someone who knew every fold of that sea of sand. Lara felt the weight of doubt with each step heavier than her backpack or the fatigue threatening her legs. Something was being left unsaid, and she was beginning to feel that the omission was more dangerous than any sandstorm. It was Callum who broke the silence first, pointing to the sky. "There," he said, his finger indicating what seemed indistinct at first. "That moving star. It's not a star, it's a drone." Lara squinted. A small light blinked slowly, moving straight and steadily. "You're being followed." "We are." "By whom?" "Depends on who noticed your presence in the desert." "You're saying my simple disappearance attracted attention?" "It's not your disappearance that attracts, Lara. It's the place where you disappeared." He said this without changing his tone, but the implication burned like the midday sun. Lara's stomach twisted. She had come to the desert seeking erasure, disappearance, but now realized she had walked into the center of something much larger. They continued walking, but the silence between them was now electric. The desert was no longer just a vast emptiness, it was a listening entity. Every grain of sand felt like a witness. Lara tried to breathe deeply to calm her racing mind, but the questions had broken free inside her, and they weren't going back. Hours later, as they rested on an outcrop protected by volcanic rock. Lara decided not to wait any longer. You told me you knew these paths, that people owed you favors, but that doesn't explain how you know, though, much about me. Or why we're being tracked by military-grade technology. Cal stared into the modest fire crackling between them. The orange light danced in his eyes, as if reflecting ancient memories. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a thin stick and began tracing symbols into the sand shapes that looked disturbingly familiar, because what you found in the southern Luxor ruins belongs to a lineage many want erased, including myself. Lara froze. Her breath caught as her mind flashed to the symbols carved into sun-baked stone spirals. Abstracted animals. The name of a king without a throne. You mean those hieroglyphs, the fragments, there, of my family, or what's left of it? The silence that followed was denser than the stifling heat. Lara searched her memory, the spiral symbols, the crossed-out names, the offerings to a forgotten ruler. It had seemed metaphorical then. Now it felt like prophecy. You weren't just a prince, she murmured. You were the heir to a kingdom, erased from history. A kingdom that defied the power of modern nations, that refused alliances, refused oil, refused submission. And because of that, it ceased to exist. Officially, he reached into his robe and pulled out a worn medallion. On its surface was the same symbol she had seen carved into sandstone, an open palm with an eye in its center. She reached toward it slowly, almost reverently. I found this symbol on a burial shroud, she whispered, but the archaeologists dismissed it as tribal art. They dismissed it because truth is dangerous, Cal said. Because accepting that we existed would mean acknowledging everything that was done to erase us. Lara leaned back against the cool stone. The sky was already turning a deep blue. The first signs of dawn danced on the horizon, but nothing seemed to bring enough light to dispel the shadows between them. And I, unknowingly, excavated your ghosts, Cal smiled, sadly. Or perhaps you began to unearth them, but it wasn't an accident. You were carefully directed to those ruins, and I was assigned to make sure you didn't cross the point of no return. The revelation stung like sand in the eyes, irritating, blinding, painful. So, you've been watching me from the beginning? No, I was deciding whether you were worthy of the truth. She jumped to her feet, furious. That's not your decision to make. I'm not a piece on your board. No, but we're all playing the same game. And who else is playing? She demanded. Who are the other players? And what exactly is at stake? Cal stood slowly, brushing the sand from his robes. His silhouette was tall and still against the growing light. You think this is about buried secrets and lost titles, but it's not. It's about control, about whether a people have the right to preserve their identity, their truths, without being rewritten by conquerors, and I'm what a threat to that. You're a fulcrum, someone whose actions could tip a delicate balance, and that makes you either a danger or a savior, depending on your choices. Lara's throat tightened. Why me? Because you ask the right questions. Because you're not content with easy answers. And because somewhere deep inside, you still believe the truth matters more than the consequences. She sat down, hard, the firelight casting long shadows over her face. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to decide tonight, he said gently. But you should know, the drone wasn't the last one. And not everyone watching is as patient as I am. Lara turned toward the sky, where the drone had already vanished. Cal's words echoed like distant thunder, and for the first time, she didn't know if the next truth would set her free or bury her forever under the sand she walked. The storm that buries Namesby, the time the sun had fully crested the horizon, the air shimmered with the warning of heat to come. Cal had insisted they rest during the day and continue walking by night, but the makeshift shelter they had built from the jagged rocks offered little protection from the rising temperature. The silence between them had grown denser, layered with confessions and revelations neither fully understood. Lara lay in the shadow of a boulder, her mind racing too fast to rest. She replayed Cal's words from the night before, not just A prince and heir to a kingdom buried by history. A guardian of a truth too volatile to be allowed oxygen. And her. An unwitting intruder into a sacred wound, guided toward the heart of something ancient, dangerous, and heartbreakingly human. She turned to look at him. He was sitting upright with his back to her, perfectly still. His robe, now dusty and wrinkled from travel, clung to his lean frame. Even in rest, he exuded tension, a spring tightly coiled. His eyes, she knew without seeing, were open, watching, always watching. "Callel," she said quietly. He didn't turn, but she saw his shoulders lift slightly. "You said people want to erase you. Your lineage, but someone protected those ruins. Someone preserved them." He nodded slowly. "Yes, not everyone is an enemy. Some people remember. Some still carry the old loyalties in secret. But they're dying out. Why not reclaim it? Why not come forward, reveal who you are, demand recognition?" This time he did turn. His eyes met hers, dark and unblinking. "Because I am not a symbol. I am not interested in parades or apologies. And because those who erased us would not hesitate to erase me again." Lara opened her mouth to speak, but a sudden change in the wind stopped her. The air, which had been dry and scorching, now held a strange electricity. Callel stood quickly and climbed to a higher rock, scanning the horizon. "What is it?" she asked, rising. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes narrowed against the light. Then he muttered a single word, "Haboob." Lara's stomach sank. She knew that word, an intense sandstorm capable of swallowing entire caravans. A living wall of dust and wind that could strip flesh from bone. She rushed to his side and followed his gaze. There it was. A massive wall of sand moving with terrifying speed across the desert. It seemed unreal, like a tsunami of earth. "Pack everything," he said sharply. "We have 15 minutes, maybe less." They moved with silent urgency, shoving supplies into their packs, securing water, wrapping cloth around their heads. Callel retrieved a long scarf and tied it tightly across Lara's face. "You stay close to me," he said. "You do not fall behind. You do not stop." "Where are we going?" "There's a crevice, a ravine 2 dunes over. It might shield us." The roar of the storm grew louder. The wind had a voice now, screaming in rage, clawing at the ground. The sunlight dimmed. Shadows stretched unnaturally. They ran. Lara's feet sank with each step, the sand softening like water. Her legs burned. Her lungs protested. The storm approached like a monstrous creature, howling with hunger. Callel didn't slow. He moved, with precision, carving a path through the shifting landscape. He turned often to check she was still behind him, his eyes unreadable behind the cloth. Then the storm hit. Sound vanished. The world became a chaos of grit and force. Lara couldn't see more than an arm's length ahead. The sand stung her eyes, even behind goggles, burned her skin, filled her ears. Every breath was like inhaling knives. She felt a hand seize hers. Callel's. He pulled her forward blindly, anchoring her in the maelstrom. The ground disappeared beneath them, and she realized they were descending the ravine. They stumbled, fell, rolled. Sand poured over them like liquid, burying, choking, then darkness. Relative silence. Callel had found a small cave, a pocket within the rocks just wide enough for 2 bodies. They collapsed. Lara couldn't speak. She lay on her back, panting, her body covered in a layer of fine dust. Callel coughed beside her, then sat up and pulled a flask from his robe. He handed it to her without a word. She drank greedily. The water was warm, but it felt like salvation. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded. "You didn't let go. That matters." They sat in silence, listening to the fury outside. The storm would pass, eventually. They always did. But they left the land reshaped, and those caught in them changed. After a long time, Lara whispered, "Was this just a storm? Or were we meant to be caught in it?" Callel glanced at her. "In the desert, nothing is just chance." She turned to face him. "Then tell me the rest. If I'm already part of this, I deserve to know what I'm risking. He looked away, his jaw tight. Do you know why my people were erased? Not just because we resisted, but because we remembered too much. We kept stories alive that others wanted forgotten. We guarded names no one dared speak aloud. Names. He reached into his robe and produced a small scroll, wrapped in leather. He unrolled it slowly, revealing a parchment filled with symbols, ancient and intricate. These are the names of the erased, the bloodline of the kingdom beyond maps. My ancestors, each one died refusing to kneel. Each one vanished into legend. Lara stared at the scroll. The ink had faded in places, but the power of it was undeniable. This was more than history, it was rebellion. Memory as resistance. You carry them with you. I carry what they died to protect, and what I may die to preserve. She touched the parchment gently, feeling its texture like the skin of time itself. Her voice was quiet. Then I won't let it die with you. Callow met her eyes. Something shifted between them, not romance, not yet, but recognition. A mutual vow made without ceremony. The storm howled outside, erasing all footsteps, but deep in the sand-hidden cave, two names remained unburied. The cave of the forgotten king ***. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered like a low hum in the bones of the desert. Fine dust still hung in the air, filtering sunlight into a surreal gold that painted everything with a quiet unreality. Callow and Lara emerged from the mouth of the cave, blinking against the morning light that seemed to pour after so much chaos. They didn't speak at first. There was something ceremonial about the silence, like the hush that follows a funeral, respectful, reflective. Their boots sank into a fresh layer of sand, reshaped by the storm into unfamiliar ridges. Landmarks had vanished. Only Callow's unerring instinct kept them moving in the right direction. It was mid-morning when they saw it. A jagged outcropping of rock, half buried and easily mistaken for geological randomness, loomed in the distance. But as they drew closer, Lara saw lines angular, deliberate, carvings, age-worn, but not eroded beyond meaning. Callow approached first, brushing sand from the stone with reverent fingers. The symbols he revealed were unlike the hieroglyphs Lara had studied. They pulsed, with a different energy, less decorative, more solemn, like warnings whispered across generations. "This is it," he said. "What is it?" He turned to her, the light casting deep shadows under his eyes. "The entrance to the burial site of Moloch al-Khaf, the forgotten king." Lara's breath caught. The name was familiar, barely, a footnote in one of the oldest texts she'd ever read, long dismissed by mainstream scholars as apocryphal. A king who ruled nothing, whose crown was made of silence, whose people vanished without a trace. A myth. But the stone was real beneath her fingertips. "Help me," Callow said, nodding toward the sand piled at the base. They dug in silence, unearthing a sloped tunnel reinforced with timber and stone. Lara felt her hands tremble, not from fatigue, but anticipation, discovery, truth. Inside, the tunnel descended steeply. Callow lit a lantern, and they moved slowly, the air growing cooler, heavier. The walls bore no embellishment, only markings etched with precision and restraint. This wasn't a tomb designed to impress. It was a sanctuary built to endure. After a while, the narrow corridor opened into a small chamber. At its center stood a sarcophagus of black stone, unadorned except for a single symbol carved into the lid, the open palm with the eye in its center. Lara stepped forward, her voice barely audible. "Is this really him?" Callow's eyes didn't leave the sarcophagus. "Yes." She knelt beside it, brushing away centuries of dust. "Then why hide him here?" "Because even in death, he was dangerous. He carried the truth of what was stolen, of what empires feared a ruler beloved, not because he was powerful, but because he listened." The stillness in the room deepened. Lara felt something settle in her chest, a weight and a clarity. She looked up at Callow. "You brought me here for a reason. I needed you to see what was erased, to understand what they tried to bury, and then what?" He reached into his robe and pulled out the scroll again. "You're not just an archaeologist. You're a voice, the only one I trust to tell this story without distortion. Lara felt her throat tighten. The responsibility pressed against her ribs. This wasn't about papers or conferences. It was about restoring something sacred. They sat for hours, recording the symbols, photographing the site with her limited equipment. Callow translated aloud the text inscribed into the surrounding walls, a eulogy to a king who ruled without violence, who gave up his throne to protect his people, who vanished willingly, as that the memory of peace might survive. The language was poetic, but not grand. It spoke of meals shared, of hands held, of simple acts elevated to leadership. It was unlike any royal archive she had ever seen. He didn't want monuments, Callow said softly. He wanted remembrance. And this ... this is all that's left. They left the chamber, just before nightfall, sealing the tunnel again with care. Callow said no one must find it without purpose. As they made camp on a dune nearby, Lara sat in the sand, her knees drawn to her chest, watching the stars emerge. She felt different, not enlightened, just ... grounded, as if something ancient now lived inside her. Callow joined her, sitting close but not touching. "Thank you," he said, for seeing him. Lara looked at him. His face was tired, his eyes older than the man they inhabited. "What happens now? We survive," he said. "And then we decide whether to stay hidden or start uncovering the rest." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. "Then we begin tonight." They spoke until late into the night, their voices hushed as if in reverence to the stars above. Callow shared stories of his childhood, of whispered names, of forbidden maps, of dreams his father had painted in the margins of old books. He spoke of the weight of inheritance, not as privilege, but as burden, a duty to remember when forgetting would be easier. Lara, in turn, spoke of Cairo, of betrayal and politics, of colleagues who smiled with daggers in hand. She confessed the loneliness that had clung to her like dust, the feeling of shouting truth into rooms that only echoed back indifference, and of the quiet desperation that had driven her into the desert, searching for something she couldn't name. Their voices wove a tapestry between them, fragile and intimate. Not romance, not yet, but kinship. Two exiles who had stumbled into one another's orbit by necessity and stayed by choice. When sleep finally came, it was not in fear, but in shared understanding. They lay beneath the stars, the notebook between them, filled with ink and intention, a record of what was found, a promise of what was still to be unearthed. And beneath their resting place, the forgotten king slept still, undisturbed, but now, no longer forgotten. The amulet and the burn past dawn after Malik al-Kaf's tomb felt quieter than the ones before. Not because of the desert stillness though, that always held, but because something had shifted in Lara. The sand no longer felt like an adversary, but like a custodian, a witness. Each grain bore the weight of history and watched them now as allies rather than intruders. Callow moved with renewed gravity that morning, packing deliberately, walking slower, his eyes scanning the horizon not just for danger, but for something unseen. Lara noticed it immediately. His rhythm had changed. The way he touched the sand, as though it might speak again if coaxed. As though Malik's tomb had reminded him of something too long held in silence. They walked without speaking for the first 2 hours. The sun was gentle still, and the air carried a hush like an ancient breath. It was only when they stopped to drink that Lara asked, "Who betrayed him?" Callow looked at her with quiet surprise. Then he sat, slowly, carefully. "A brother," he said at last, "not of blood, but of oath. A man who wanted to be remembered through conquest rather than compassion. The world rewards power, Lara, not wisdom." She nodded slowly. "And you, who betrayed you?" His silence answered louder than any confession. They resumed their path, this time in the direction of a ridge Callow called Arhim's Crest. There, he said, was a marker, a talisman buried into the stone, a wayfinder known only to his people. Lara didn't press. She had learned, by now, that his truths came in fragments, earned slowly, Like trust in the desert. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge. It rose, like a sleeping giant, scattered with dark stones and wind-worn ledges. Callel led her along a narrow path carved not by nature, but by deliberate hands. Old hands. At the base of a cleft in the rock, he stopped. He knelt. "There's something I want to show you," he said, his voice slower than usual. From beneath his robes, he retrieved a small satchel wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, nestled in layers of linen, was a bronze amulet, weathered, cracked, but unmistakably crafted with care. It bore the same sigil Lara had seen in the tomb, the open palm and the watchful eye. "This belonged to my mother," Callel said. "It was forged when she was named guardian of the lineage, passed down from her grandmother. Each bearer etched a mark on the back. A personal truth." Lara turned the amulet in her palm. On the reverse side were 8 markings, each distinct. A swirl, a single dot, a series of parallel lines, a broken crescent. "Yours?" she asked. "I never earned mine." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Then, I ran. When the palace burned, I was given a choice: die a symbol or live unknown. I chose exile." His voice didn't crack. It had cracked long ago. "What remained was the echo. They set fire to everything," he continued. "The archives, the libraries, even the prayer gardens. They wanted not just our bodies, but our memory. So I took the amulet, and I vanished." He stood abruptly and turned his face toward the wind. "I tell you this not for pity, but so you understand what we carry. This amulet is the only surviving link between Moloch and me, between the peace he stood for and the silence I've endured." Lara clutched it with reverence. "We can still carve your mark," she said. He shook his head. "That is not mine to decide." Night fell quickly over Orhim's crest. They built a small fire in a natural hollow, its light casting flickering shadows on the amulet laid between them. As they ate, Lara asked something she had long wondered. "Why me?" Callel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was different, almost tender. "Because you arrived without expectation, because you listened before you judged, and because when you found yourself lost in the desert, you didn't curse it. You respected it," he added. After a pause, "You remind me of her, my mother. She questioned everything, even our elders. But she never betrayed the truth." Lara felt the weight of his words settle between them. She had expected danger, adventure, even deception, but not this slow unwinding of grief, this rebuilding of trust through dust and time. Before sleep, she held the amulet again, tracing the silent lineage with her fingers. A thought came to her quietly. Perhaps the desert hadn't broken Callel. Perhaps it had preserved him, kept his truth safe until someone arrived to help carry it. She lay back, eyes on the stars. Above them, constellations moved through ancient patterns, unchanged for millennia. And somewhere beyond that sky, the memory of a kingdom refused to die. The fire crackled beside her, steady, small, and defiant, like the last heir of a forgotten world. Like the archaeologist who refused to forget. A kingdom invisible, and the men who want silence. Sethi broke camp before dawn, moving in silence. Both of them waited by what had been shared and what hadn't. The desert had changed for Lara. What had once been an expanse of hardship had become a living manuscript. Every dune, every crack in the rock felt sacred now. The dry air was a kind of truth serum. And Callel, no longer just a mysterious guide, had become something else. Not quite a companion, not quite a cause, but something vital. They followed a path etched into memory more than map. Callel explained little, and Lara didn't press. The amulet now hung from her neck, not as possession, but as stewardship. She touched it often, unconsciously, as if it carried Callel's heartbeat. By late morning, the heat pressed down like a judgment. They sought shelter in the shade of a jagged cliff, eating dates and dried meat in silence. "I think I'm being watched," Lara said finally. Callel didn't look up. "You are." That wasn't the answer she expected. "They've followed us since the storm," he added. "Unmarked men." likely mercenaries, hired to ensure the past stays buried. And you know this how? I know who profits from silence. She studied his face. He was calm, but there was a strain there, tightness around his mouth, an old bruise beneath the skin. Then we're not safe. No, he said, and his voice was more steel than shadow. But we're close. Close to what? He took a breath. To what's left of the kingdom. Lara blinked. You mean it still exists? Not as you'd think. No cities, no banners, but a people scattered. A legacy held in whispers, and a sanctuary hidden, protected. They waited for the sun to dip before moving again. This time, they traveled across broken terrain that rose in sharp escarpments. Callel seemed to measure their steps in rhythm with the stars above, calculating something only he understood. Near midnight, they reached a canyon. It opened like a wound in the earth, narrow and uninviting. Callel led her through, pausing often, tapping the rock with a carved bone rod he produced from his satchel. Code, he explained. Every clan left markers. This canyon was once a trade artery. Now it's a threshold. Lara's heart beat faster. As they passed the third bend, she heard it. Faint voices carried on the wind, then the glint of torchlight, and finally, emerging from the rock like ghosts, figures, 6 men, wrapped in robes the color of ash, their faces covered. But their posture was neither hostile nor afraid. Callel raised a hand. Brothers, he said in Arabic. I come with purpose. The tallest among them stepped forward. He studied Callel in silence, then slowly removed his head covering. He was older, with deep-set eyes and a scar tracing his cheek. You were warned never to return. I was, Callel said, but I come not for myself. I come for him. He pointed to the amulet on Lara's chest. A ripple passed through the group. One of the men knelt. She carries the seal. The elder looked at Lara. Do you know what that means? I'm learning, she replied. A long pause. Then the elder nodded. Then enter. But know this, those who chase you are not far behind. And if they find this place, they won't, Callel said. They passed through an arch cut into the stone, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. On the other side was a hollowed sanctuary, built into the walls of the canyon. Dozens of tents, woven tapestries, sacred fires, and people, real, breathing, whispering people. Women and children, elders, warriors, a tribe preserved through exile. Lara couldn't speak. Callel looked at her. This is what they wanted erased. She walked among them, watching how they touched the ground, how they treated one another with dignity, not hierarchy. She saw drawings etched into the walls, songs written in flowing script, bowls of herbs passed with care. Culture, not just survival. This, she whispered, is history breathing. Callel took her to a tent in the upper alcove. Inside was a map hand-drawn, centuries old. It showed the boundaries of the old kingdom, and beneath it, newer lines. Escape routes, caches, safe houses. We've been waiting, said the elder, for someone who could tell the truth without selling it. Lara stared at the map, then at Callel. They'll come for me, she said. They will, he replied, but I won't stop. And the elder, nodding, said only, then neither will we. In the canyon, night fell like a curtain. But inside, the firelight grew brighter. The kingdom had no throne, but it had returned. The kiss that didn't happen, the bullet that almost did. Sanctuary inside the canyon felt timeless. Its sandstone walls, worn smooth by wine and age, seemed to hum with quiet resilience. Lara moved like a careful observer, listening more than speaking, feeling more than analyzing. But beneath the calm, there was motion, a current beneath the surface, and everyone, from the elders to the children who peeked at her shyly from behind woven curtains, seemed to sense it. At sunrise, the air was fragrant with tea and dried herbs. Women sat in circles, weaving and sorting spices. Men prepared tools, sharpened blades, whispered among themselves in low, rhythmic tones. Callel, now draped in a darker robe of woven indigo, walked among them like someone both known and questioned. Lara followed at a distance. There was something different in the way they looked at him. Not quite reverence, not quite resentment. A complex blend of memory and caution. He was a ghost returning to life. And with him came the past and possibly a future no one dared name aloud. That evening, Lara was called to the council tent. She entered to find 7 elders seated in a semicircle, their eyes sharp beneath silver brows. The central figure, the same scarred man from the gate, nodded to her. "You are not of us," he said, "but you carry our blood's memory." "I carry your truth," Lara replied, "because I believe it matters." A murmur of agreement. The elder gestured toward the fire pit between them. "You are being hunted. Not for who you are, but for what you might reveal." "I know," she said. "What you saw, the tomb, the amulet, our survival, it must not be traded for academic currency." "I didn't come for a paper," Lara said. "I came because I needed silence, and found a story that refused to stay buried." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, the elder smiled. "You speak like one of us." Later that night, Callel found her at the edge of the canyon, staring at the stars. He sat beside her, silent for a long time. "They trust you," he said. "And you," he turned to her slowly, "I trust that you will leave if you must. But I also hope you'll stay." Lara looked at him, her heart thudding. There were 1,000 ways she could respond, but none of them felt right. Not now. Not yet. Instead, she reached for his hand. The moment stretched between them. A breath, a heartbeat, a silence heavy with what almost was, then a sound like thunder cracked through the night. A bullet slammed into the stone near Lara's shoulder. Callel yanked her down, rolling behind a low ridge. "Sniper," he hissed. "East Ridge." More shots rang out, sharp and cold. The sanctuary erupted in alarm cries, footsteps, scrambling. Callel pulled her into a narrow crevice behind a water cistern. "Are you hurt?" "No, just stunned. They found us." Another crack, another plume of shattered rock. Lara gripped his arm. "We have to move." "No," he said. "We have to divide." She stared at him. "What? They want you. They think if they take you, the story dies. You're the voice, Lara. They know that. I'm not leaving you. You won't be. I'll follow in shadow. But you have to leave now. There's a back passage through the herbal chamber. Takes you out to the west dunes." "Callel," he cupped her face. Just for a moment, not a kiss, but close, closer. Then breath. "Go," he said, "before I make a mistake." She ran behind her. Chaos roared. But ahead, the path opened like a question, and she, for the first time, carried not just the story. She carried him. The salt bridge and the fate of the exiled west dunes were colder than Lara expected. Night clung to the sand like damp silk, and the stars above, so beautiful only hours before, now looked like eyes, watching, waiting. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsed behind a half-buried rock, and tried to still her breath. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but her heart hadn't slowed. Her ears were tuned to every shift of the wind, every hiss of disturbed sand. She was alone. For the first time since Callel had stepped out of the heat and into her life, she couldn't see him, couldn't feel his presence behind her. He said he would follow. She had to believe that at first light. She moved cautiously, skirting the dunes and heading west toward what Callel had called Al-Jizr-al-Mil, the salt bridge, a flat expanse of dried salt flats that shimmered like broken glass in the morning sun. Callel had described it as sacred land, once used for ancient pilgrimages. But it was also exposed, treacherous, and watched. She reached it by midday. Lips cracked, water nearly gone. The wind scraped across the flats, carrying flecks of salt that stung her cheeks. But ahead, like a mirage refusing to vanish, stood a structure. Low, pale, hidden among heat distortions. A shelter. She staggered to the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air was cooler. Shelves carved into the rock held clay pots, folded blankets, and a chipped metal cup. The place had been used recently. She took a long drink from a covered jar and collapsed onto a rug. Only then did she cry, not from fear, but from the sheer relief of still being alive. At sunset, she heard footsteps. Not many, not hurried, measured. She reached for a small blade one of the Bedouin women had given her and waited. Then Khalil entered, shadowed by golden light. He looked exhausted, his robes torn, his face streaked with dust and blood. "Hi," she whispered. He dropped beside her without a word and took her hand, not trembling. "Just there, I thought I lost you," she said. "You almost did." She reached to touch a cut above his brow, but he stopped her. "Later. We're not safe yet." He explained what had happened after they separated. The sanctuary had been breached, not destroyed, but scarred. The elders had scattered the people into the dunes, hidden paths, silent oaths. But the attackers had one goal, to silence Lara, and they will try again, Khalil said. "They think if you vanish, the rest of us will stay buried, but they're wrong," she replied, "because I've already told the story. I wrote it in the notebook, hid a copy near the king's tomb, sent another to Cairo. It's out." Khalil looked at her as if seeing her anew. "You never asked for permission." "I didn't need it. Truth doesn't belong to kings." He laughed short, dry. "No, it belongs to those brave enough to carry it." They stayed that night in the salt shelter, speaking in low tones, planning the next move. They would head east now, toward an old outpost where Khalil's last ally waited, a man with a plane, a way out. Lara didn't want to leave, but she knew now, to protect the truth, she had to step back into the world that had once betrayed her. "Will you come with me?" she asked. Khalil's eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure the world is ready to see me. That's not what I asked." He said nothing, but in the silence, there was a yes. Outside, the salt flats glistened beneath the moon, a bridge between memory and movement, between exile and return, and they crossed it together, not as strangers, not as saviors, but as to people who had chosen to believe that the past deserved a future, the kingdom she never asked for, the choice he never expected. The outpost wasn't on any map. It sat behind a wall of fractured cliffs, its rusted gate disguised beneath camouflage netting and silence. Lara saw it from a distance first, barely, more than a shadow curling against the rock. It was Khalil who stopped, raised his hand, and signaled, a bird call. Sharp, subtle. Seconds passed, then movement. A figure appeared atop the ridge, rifle in hand, face hidden behind mirrored goggles. He didn't speak, just nodded. They were expected. Inside, the outpost was lean, practical. It smelled of fuel, sweat, and iron. There were crates of supplies, a rust-red aircraft half covered in tarp, and men who moved like ghosts, sufficient, watchful, scarred. Khalil introduced them only by glances. One by one, they acknowledged Lara without question. Not welcome, but not resistance either, just inclusion. A shared cause without signatures. That night, as they prepared for flight, Lara sat alone in a dim corner of the hangar, writing. Not in her notebook, but in a digital file. A full account, names changed, details coded. Truth disguised just enough to protect, but alive. Unmistakably alive, the world would see it. In time, not as spectacle, not as scandal, but as testimony. Khalil joined her in silence. He watched the cursor blink on the screen. "You wrote it," he said. "I had to. And what happens when they come for you?" She looked up. "Then they'll have to admit I exist." "That we all do," he smiled, not with triumph, but relief. The next morning, as the sun lifted over the cliffs, Lara stood beside the plane. Khalil checked its wings himself, touched every rivet, tested every gauge. She watched him, feeling something crack and heal at the same time. He turned to her. "You don't have to leave." "I do," she said, "because the story doesn't end here, and neither does yours." A long silence passed between them. Then he said, "When the world comes to you asking for proof, give them your voice. When they come with doubt, give them fire. I'll give them you," she whispered. "All of you, the part that history tried to swallow." He touched her face gently. No kiss. Still no kiss, but something deeper. Then he stepped back, and she climbed aboard. The engine roared to life, the desert blurred, the cliffs faded, and Lara flew carrying ghosts, carrying memory, carrying a kingdom that lived now not in land, but in truth. She landed in Cairo 2 days later. The story went out, under another name, but it went out. Within weeks. Whispers became headlines. Articles debated, historians argued, governments denied. But the story spread quietly, virally, irresistibly, and somewhere, in a hidden sanctuary among dunes, a man watched it unfold and smiled, because some kingdoms are never built of stone, some kingdoms live in those who remember, and some queens never need a crown. If this story stirred something in you, if the wind in the dunes echoed louder, or Khalil's silence spoke to places you thought forgotten, subscribe to Secrets and Destinations and join us on more journeys like this. Leave a comment with what part of this story stayed with you, and if you believe in remembering what the world tried to erase. Don't forget to like, share, and pass it forward. Your voice keeps these stories alive.